Hey, Aarron, I had to get unmuted there. It's good to see you.
You as well. Well, as you know, today we wanted to use our time in this Leadership Alive to talk about conversations.
I thought we should talk about something else.
Okay.
I mean, what I'm hearing, Aarron, from everybody is the number one issue is workforce. And one of the things that's very clear that's happening is that people are not signing up to work in EMS in the way that they used to. And it's likely because not only have conditions not improved, conditions have continued to get worse. And it's likely.
John, are you talking about we got to pay people more? I mean, is that what you're getting to? Is that
what I'm getting at is that we finally need to start paying attention to workforce in a real and meaningful way. And that's likely meaning we have a workforce movement that gets people organized.
But John, we're in the greatest challenge our industry has ever seen. Our reimbursement is at an all-time low. Our expenses at an all-time high. We can't possibly even consider changes.
Have you even seen the statistics? A fifth of the healthcare workforce is left, and we have no clue. We know it's at least that within the EMS ranks.
Have you seen the numbers around the average percent call and the payer mix that ambulance services across our nation see every day?
Aarron, people in California are working as EMTs for little or no pay, and they are being abused, and it's time that this stops.
Well, folks, John and I can't keep this going because it's so contrary to our nature. What we were trying to do is show you what a conversation is not. I hope you noticed a few things. If you were all sitting with us, we would quiz you. And one of the first things I would ask, and John, be my participant for just a moment in our class. John, did you notice the two individuals demonstrating this conversation? Did it seem like they listened to each other?
Sure didn't.
Did you notice interruptions, or did they allow the other person to finish their thoughts, contemplate, and then respond?
Yeah, not at all.
Did you sense that they were open to the other person's thoughts, ideas, and maybe even hearing something new or different?
Yeah, there wasn't any listening going on at all, other than just sort of the top level words, right?
Or listening long enough to wait to say what you wanted to say.
Right, right.
So, folks, what we wanted to do today was actually talk about this. Talk about what a true conversation is. And this topic feels so important during this time, especially during this great resignation that we're hearing about, and many of us are experiencing, many of you are experiencing in your places of employment every day. If you have a few moments, look for two articles. One was from Forbes in September of 2021. The other was from the Harvard Business Review in October of 2021. Not peer-reviewed research, but survey-based research where they asked individuals who had left organizations during this great resignation, as we've called it, why they've left. And interestingly, two different periodicals found something similar. And what they found, first and foremost, of all of the different reasons, is the people leaving said they don't listen.
Yeah, and you know, for you and I, leadership from a place where people willingly follow, not from an authoritarian standpoint, but leading people, being an influencer in your organization and getting people to follow, this whole idea of deep listening is really important. And it gets to what you and I think is really the currency of leadership, which is conversations. We think that if you're going to lead people from a place that isn't just about your position and power to say do it or else, but you want people to follow because they want to, then conversation is the tool that you really need. And so that's really the groundwork of where we come from. We think that conversations are essential for leadership.
And as many of you know, we focus and emphasize 10 of them, but really encourage, especially at that frontline leadership level. We might call it supervisors, we might call it leads, captains, all kinds of different titles. But that frontline leader, we really emphasize 3 of them: the connecting, the encouraging, and the expectation conversation, often wrapped up in that 4th one, which is the storytelling conversation. But what really occurred to us in our own experiences and in experiences with many of you was this assumption that we knew how to have a conversation, the basic components. And so as we kind of put together in the tagline for today's session, in this world we live in of kind of this echo chamber where we select what source of information we want, where we go and find information that confirms what we already believe and think. In this world of no conversations, we would start today and really talk about the components of a true conversation and the things that often make conversations challenging, where we may have to do some work. Because it's easy to have conversations with people that we agree with, or they agree with us, that we like, we might have relationships with. But the places we really need to have powerful conversations is with folks who don't agree with us, we may not like, we may have had bad experiences with in the past. So, John, I'm curious, you often talk about a true conversation, and you describe it in a way that I think is really clear and simple.
Yeah. So, and interestingly, the way I like to talk about it is from your standpoint, right? So, a conversation. What is a conversation? A conversation is where there's dialogue going on, an exchange of ideas between 2 people, or more maybe, but at the minimum between 2 people. So, a conversation really is if it's happening, there's an exchange going on. And when I think about whether I'm having a real conversation, I ask myself 2 questions. And one is, and they're both about listening, because this component of the conversation that I can control is how much I listen. And so I ask myself, am I listening when the other person is talking? And you saw this at the beginning when we were arguing about what's most important in EMS today. There wasn't this listening going on. And so the 2 things for real conversations that we often talk about is, are you listening with the possibility that you might learn something? Or are you listening with the possibility that you might change your mind? And the reason those are so important as sort of a foundation for conversations is that they both suggest a kind of openness on my part. If I go into the conversation with an agenda, if I go into the conversation with, I'm just going to deliver a message, or I want to win, I'm not doing either of those things.
And one of the things that I often share, to just be kind of overt about this, is in the beginning, as John and I were talking and trying to role play this for you, I don't think we certainly weren't having a conversation. What I suggest is we were actually having an argument, even if we didn't raise our voices. Because what we tried to display was really no listening, no openness or willing to hear something new or different, but simply waiting for the other person to stop talking, or in some cases, not waiting, to simply say what I want to say. Some of you, we've had a chance to do counsel process with, and so that terminology should ring a bell. And when we did counsel process, there was a little piece to it that didn't allow us to speak. Because when I'm sitting in this argument, even if my voice isn't raised, and I'm simply trying to figure out what I'm going to say next, you can imagine that these aren't working. And even if they are, they're not really listening and hearing. my wife was joining us today, she would give you numerous examples of where Aarron demonstrates this. I can nod and, yeah, that sounds frustrating. Wow, that happened today. But my brain's really saying, I really want to turn the TV on and watch Deadliest Catch because there's a new episode. Not listening.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is, I think when we talk about communication, and often if we went to a course about communication and improving in communication, they would likely talk about active listening, right? This whole process of where I lean forward and I nod and I made and smile and might repeat back what the person has said, all of those things. And what we want to say to you is forget all of that. It's garbage. Why should you have to pretend to be listening if you're not really listening? So just acknowledge that you're not having a conversation and stop. Don't pretend. Don't do the lean forward, all of that. Instead, the first kind of thing about great conversations, and especially the connecting conversation, which we think is the most important conversation that you as a leader should be having with your people. One where you are simply the connecting conversation, and the purpose of it is simply to connect as a human being and learn about the other person and come to a place where there's an exchange of ideas happening that connects you and pulls you together. And in that connecting conversation, one of the most important elements for you to cultivate is curiosity. And curiosity is this simple idea of thinking and opening yourself to learning, to knowing someone better. And curiosity is a wonderful tool because when you get curious about something, the mind begins to function differently. It's just as if imagine this. Imagine just becoming more curious about conversations, which is what we're doing today. We're just saying, what's underneath it? How do people exchange? It's this developing an interest in something.
And I might pause us for a moment and talk a little bit about some of the things that might keep us from being able to have great conversations. And
yes.
I wanted to emphasize two, and John, please add to them, but one that I was hoping you would talk about after I hit a couple is these brain disconnections we have, cognitive biases that may also affect us. But the first one I wanted to talk about is the obvious one, I think, which is time. When our schedule is so full and our meetings are constructed to only cover the what and the how, all of the analytical, we're not going to find ourselves in a place, free space, where we can be open. My brain is going to go, I only have a few more minutes. What can it be? John, get it done, get it out of the way, because I have a next thing on the agenda, and then the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. I'm not going to really, I might hear, but I'm not going to listen. And I'm certainly not going to listen with a willingness to hear something new or different. Time. I know we're all busy. I know we live in a world that's busy. But if you believe that, like we do, that conversations, especially those three, are the heart and soul of great cultures and high employee engagement, then the question I have to ask is, why isn't that amount of time as necessary as the time we give to finding the new trucks and deploying the trucks and the new CME we're going to do and the new class we're going to teach? At some point, we have to make leadership time as valuable as operational time if we want a great culture with high employee engagement.
Yeah, how often do we hear somebody say in the organizations we work with, they say, oh yeah, I need to talk to Don. And what they're saying is, I have to deliver a message.
Right, I need to talk at Don.
Right, and there's this delivering of a message and a wanting to be efficient in that. And what we have to say about, especially, so if you see our 10 conversations put up in a chart, what we say is the conversations that we're advocating that you have the most of, that you have, that those are conversations that don't have a lot of intensity in them. A connecting conversation. Hey, Aarron, how are you? How's the family? You went on that fishing trip. How was that? That connecting conversation should happen all of the time. But what we often hear is, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to go connect with my people, create some space so that I can actually be curious and we can have an exchange of ideas that are just about humans touching one another on very human activities.
The next one I wanted to mention was desire. And what I mean by that is a little nuanced. On the surface is, I might not want to. I don't want to talk to that person. I'm not interested in what they have to say. I know they've talked about me. I know they've been against me. They're one of our worst. The litany goes on. They believe something different than I believe. They act in a way differently than I believe. And I don't want to talk to them. I certainly don't want to listen to them. And all of their actions and behaviors to make you feel that way, and how you feel that way may be valid. They indeed may someone who's be toxic in your organization, be destroying your organization, working against you and working against the mission. But I think all of us have probably experienced at some time in our life that when we can ourselves rise above that, set aside our judgments of the person, our emotional response to the way they present, and listen. If we can rise above that and listen, there'll be something there. Often, those folks that can be the most toxic, if we can separate the noise, we can hear something really good. And it's a skill we have to practice. It's a skill I have to practice, is to know, and it's a wonderful place to do some self-exploration with emotional intelligence. There's a number of resources. One we often use is Emotional Intelligence 2.0, has a little self-assessment in it, and then breaks your emotional intelligence into 4 domains. Can I understand my own emotion? So if I'm gonna have a conversation with John and I'm not aware of my hot buttons, I guarantee you he is. And I guarantee you he'll know when to push those buttons. But if I can feel it, if I can feel the JVD start and the facial flush come and that vein pop out on the forehead, then I can control it. Can I understand my own emotions and can I regulate them? Then can I read others? Can I read the room? And then can I respond based on what I'm reading? So desire, do I have the desire to do it? Do I come to the conversations with judgment? Do I come to the conversations with a bias about the individual, their behaviors, their history, those things? If I do, I'm not going to have a conversation. Can I find a way to rise above it? And even to rise above it during the conversation. It might start with, well, yeah, there's something really important I got to talk to you about, but you won't care. You've never listened. This hasn't been important to you. You're never around. You're traveling all the time. Whatever all of those little poke, 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 poke might be. Okay, John. But what is it? What's this thing that you are so passionate about? Desire. Do I have the desire to actually be part of a real conversation?
So you might have hit, I think, on what is one of the biggest barriers. Because it's really easy to have conversations with folks we like, right? And because we're naturally curious about them, we all of that. But the person that we don't like, and I think for leaders, and I really want to say this, is if you're going to be influential with people from a transformational standpoint, from a place where who you are and where you're going, and the relationship you build with people is what inspires people to want to follow. If you're going to do that, there are going to be people that you're trying to lead who you don't like and may not like you. And the challenge is, and we see this every day now in our society, is that if we don't like somebody, or we don't like their point of view, or we don't like their politics, we're immediately going to turn them off. And so one of the things we advocate for supervisors is we say, get a list of your direct reports. Take this list of your direct reports and ask yourself, have I connected warmly and positively and given the time to really connect with the people on my list this month? And notice on the list, on your list, who it is that's easy to go and talk to. And yet the ones that are going to cause you the most problem are likely to be the ones that you don't want to go talk to. And what we would encourage, and this is where the communication skill gets really developed, is that you really go and connect with those people. And the desire may be, I don't feel like I want to talk to them, but I know it's the right thing to do. And Aarron and I, in our business, we certainly know people that we don't want to talk to. But we recognize that those are actually the people we should make the time for, and then actually purposely reach out. And one of the things I just want to suggest, when you're talking with somebody that you don't like, or who you know has a different point of view than you do, one of the things that you have to do is suspend your agenda. You just have to suspend that. You stop with the idea that you're going to make a point, that you're going to somehow educate them, that you're going to somehow change their mind, because that will shut down the first two things that we said, that possibility that you might learn something and that you might change your mind. So it's a real suspension of your own position and opinion.
And John, I was wondering if you might talk about the cognitive biases and how the many, but maybe a few, stand out in your mind, how they can often challenge us in conversations.
Yeah, so these are some people call them logic flaws or logic fallacies, but they're things that our brains do that have helped us survive. And yet in the world that we live in, don't often help us when we're trying to build great cultures and influence people underneath us. So one of the most common ones is what we call the subjective bias. And the subjective bias is that we believe the world is what we want it to be. And so that means that we come to conversations loaded with all of our own opinions and all of our own ideas, which leads us to the next one we often talk about, which is the confirmation bias. And the confirmation bias is that we actually privilege, we actually preference, we actually move toward information and ideas and conversations that reinforce what we already believe, and that we move away from those that challenge what we might already believe. So you can see how that might work and shut me down in a conversation. The minute Aarron starts talking about money, when I'm trying to talk about a worker's rights, immediately I put up a wall. I don't move toward, instead of me saying, oh, Aarron, so clearly the financial issue is so important to you. Tell me more about that. Instead, I just put up a wall against that. So that one, there's one more I'll mention, and that's that, and we'll see this a lot, is that we also have a bias toward negativity. And so how that works in conversation is that negativity often either ignites us or pushes our buttons, or creates a way in which we can't see around it. And so our brains are designed to sort of enlarge and magnify negative information, whereas positive information, we won't. It's the old saying in restaurants, right? You often say this, one person, you have a good experience, they'll tell one person. They have a bad experience, they'll tell 10. So it's this kind of thing. And being aware of when you go to talk to difficult people, the people you don't want to, all of your cognitive biases will get activated.
And as I myself need to work on being better at conversation being more open to conversation. I've been working on kind of 4 things. And John, you might share ones that you use as well. So for me, the first one is for myself and for the other individual. I try to be really clear about if I'm conveying information. In other words, it's not a conversation, and or if it's going to be a conversation. So I might start, if it's conveying information, I might say, hey, John, I want to spend just a couple minutes with you getting really clear about how we do vehicle deployment here. So I just want to start up front about I'm conveying some information. Now, maybe John's very passionate about the way we do it, feels like we're doing it wrong, or has some thoughts and ideas about how we might modify it. And I've known this, I've heard this, it's worked its way towards me. If I want to have a conversation, I might say, hey, John, I'm hearing you have some thoughts and ideas about how we do our vehicle deployment. I'd like to hear them. Or I'd like to have a conversation about it, which leads into kind of the second thing that I try to practice, which is likely, watch to see if John smiles when I say this, my single greatest flaw as a leader is I should spend 90% of the conversation listening and 10% of it talking. See the smile? Because I don't do that very well. And of course, that doesn't make for a conversation. Hey, John, I want to have a conversation. And now I just talk for the next 25 minutes. That's a lecture or a sermon. So the first thing I try to do is be clear in my own mind, and then ultimately with the other individual or individuals, whether I'm conveying information or truly want to have a conversation. I try to prep myself with spending the time listening. Instead of starting, I think it should be this way. I want to start with, what do you think about our vehicle deployment? What's working well? Where might we improve? I try to go last in the conversation rather than starting it with, well, I don't think you agree with how we do our conversation or do our deployment. Tell me why. So I'm trying to be the listener, trying to force myself to be the listener. And if I find myself in a pinch, or I find that I've in the conversation been backed into a corner to say yes or no, for or against, whatever, it's one of the rules I try to teach every new supervisor is to say, I'd like to think about it. So that I don't allow non-conversation to come out. I don't allow my cognitive bias to come out. I don't allow my perception to come out. I don't allow my judgment of the other person to come out. Is to give myself a chance to think, to give myself a chance to reflect on what they said, be able to separate in my own mind the way they portrayed it with the message that they were portraying. So I give myself the opportunity to say, I'd like to think about it.
And you would do that in what kind of situation? So playing off our earlier conversation where I'm advocating for a labor movement and you're advocating for paying attention to finances, what might get you to?
Yeah, so imagine in that conversation you were to say something like, so Aarron, I need an answer from you. Do you support a labor movement for our nation's ambulance services or for their personnel? And I can feel it in me. I was like, I might just say, yeah, I'm not right or not real sure right now. I'd like to think about it.
So I love.
Do you agree with me on that item?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Right now, I'm feeling a little different, but I'd like to think about it. And I'm not using it to kill the conversation. I'm not using it as a control tool. When I'm saying it, I truly mean it. And I would hope that I would then follow up and say, John, gosh, I've been reflecting. You asked me that question about a labor movement for our nation's EMS. And I've reflected a little bit on it and like to kind of pick up our conversation from that point.
So I love that you're doing that. And I hope that our listeners get this, because if I'm being influential with especially subordinates and people I want to follow me, often we kill the connection right there. When I don't pause and I don't say, I need to think about that, or do something to create, I call it a pause, create the pause, right? If you create the pause, because what often we see happening is that's where the button gets pushed and we go off and the relationship is harmed. And that's, I mean, I think because what do we hear all the time? Not only did you quote the Forbes article and the other article about saying people don't listen to me, the most common thing that we hear from frontline providers in the EMS industry is that the leaders don't listen to them and don't care about them. And so if I'm going to jump right in, I maybe will immediately reinforce that idea that I don't listen and I don't care.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. I might confirm that belief that I don't listen and don't care. So if we have this conversation and maybe it's from a source that has good information, but they present it poorly. Maybe it's a source that's not one of our best employees, but is trying to convey an important point. And I may not agree with them. And we may spar back and forth. What I hope at the end of that conversation is I don't expect them to leave with, oh my gosh, wow, Aarron is just incredible. Or wow, he did exactly what I asked him to do, or any of that. What I want them to leave with, even if we disagree and stated different points of view, is to say, wow, but he listened. I'm having a chance to work with a team, and there's some tension that happens to be happening with this particular team, and it manifests in all kinds of things, as any of you on this that are listening to this can imagine. But when I dig, I hear the same message over and over again. The other team member is not listening to me, and I don't feel heard. I didn't ask them to agree. I didn't expect them to agree. But it really hurts when I don't feel heard and I don't feel listened to. And I think that's what our staff tell us over and over again. None of them that I've ever encountered through our survey work have ever believed that somehow we'd raise our Harry Potter wand and start paying them like doctors and nurses get paid, and vehicle deployment would go away and system status management would never happen again. And we'd do 3 calls in a 24-hour shift, and never got that from anybody. What they've often just said is, I just want to be heard. So I try to get clear about when I'm conveying information versus a conversation. So if I'm just conveying information, hopefully there's not a perception that this was a dialogue. If I need to convey something, I need to convey it. I try to make sure I do better at listening and try to catch myself. I'm not interrupting, I'm listening, forcing myself to say, this conversation, you're not supposed to talk, so that these work and this can shut down. Try to go last. I don't mean last like get the last word. Didn't mean that. I mean, allow them to speak and say what they need to say before I interject or set the table. So we're going to talk about vehicle deployment, but what's off the table is we won't discuss system status management and whether or not we do Bravo status. Great conversation. You just took off the things I wanted to really talk about. So I try to go last from that standpoint. And if I find myself needing the pause, I love that, John, then I often use I need to think about this. Those are what work for me. What works for you, John?
Well, I have a couple of things I'll just mention here at the end of this, and I really like what you said, and it caused me to think about a few things. One is that in the middle of conversation, be very careful about comparing experiences. So when someone's telling you about what happened on the shift last night, and that it was a challenging thing, maybe it was a conflict they had with a partner or another crew or something else, when you're hearing about that, don't compare experiences.
Hmm.
It's a natural tendency. It's very human to want to compare experiences because we want to ally with them. Yeah, I've been there before. I've actually had that happen to me. And we want to do that. And our intention is good because we want to say, hey, I do understand. And I think the motivation is often empathy, and the motivation is often a wanting to identify with them. But what I would encourage is not. And instead validate their experience. Say, wow, that sounds like a real experience, and then validate that.
Yeah, and the other thing I just wanted to mention about conversations is it takes practice, especially the hard ones, especially the where you want to disagree, that it's hard to hear that particular feedback. Because the other thing that conversations are closely aligned with is influence. And we think a lot about influence, of course, of leading up. I want to influence my boss and my boss's boss and stuff. But I think the place we really want to be able to influence is with all of the employees we work with or work for us.
Yeah.
And so imagine if influence has components of the other person feels listened to, feels heard. You brought a willingness to hear something new or different. You are open to the possibility of changing your mind, even if you don't. You spent 90% of the time listening, 10% of the time talking, and the list goes on. If you felt that from someone else, would you likely seek that person out more often? Would you likely be open to more information from that person? Probably,
Yeah.
I would.
And interestingly, Aarron, I don't necessarily need or want you to like me, but what I do is I need or want you to value me. All of us as human beings. So this is this thing that people want from work. We those of you that have worked with us know that we often talk about this whole idea of respect, connection, and meaning, but it anchored in this whole idea of respect is this idea of, do you value me? And even if you disagree with me, one of the great things is to say, I really appreciate you sharing that point of view. I hear that you feel this way. I hear that you think it should be this way. And I really value that you're contributing these things to our organization. This somehow mirroring back a valuing of the other person. And we're all judging that, and we're judging the authenticity of it. It can't just be words. I'm judging, Aarron, whether you actually really do indeed value my perspective and value that we're connecting at this level. So this whole idea of being able, as you influence, to convey the fact that you value the other person. People will stay in organizations where they feel valued.
And the thing I might mention here at the end, and I love, John, that you began with the concept of curiosity, and you'll hear that more and more from us as we've really noticed it. It really became apparent in a recent project, and now kind of with that thought in our minds, we see it more often. And so the connection I wanted to make is, if you find yourself often struggling with conversations, they don't seem to go well, they often seem to be challenged, or they have negative outcomes, I'd be curious about your own ability with conversations. Because, of course, the easy part is to say, it's John's fault. He didn't listen. He doesn't understand. He didn't get it. He doesn't, go back to our first role play. He doesn't run a service. And when's the last time? And when's he had to do payroll? And I can come up with all of these reasons to not ask myself, did I own any of that? We need to own, if we're going to be leaders, we need to own the vast majority of the conversation.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to suggest, as we're checking to see if we've got questions coming in here, one of the things I wanted to suggest is when you're connecting with people, one of the best things to say to yourself is am I being cheerful? Cheerful is an interesting word, but it is this idea of bringing us a positive energy to the conversation, where people actually leave the conversation feeling positive. And cheerfulness is often seen when we notice the good things about the others, we notice the good things that are in the situation, and bringing cheerfulness often is a wonderful way to end a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would just add that point, especially if it was one where at the end we may not necessarily have agreed with each other, but a great way, especially if indeed we believe this, would be to say, so John, I really appreciated you sharing your thoughts. I'm not sure that I agree, but I really appreciated your point of view, one that I hadn't considered up to this point. At least acknowledge that you were listening, and that's where, you know, the active listening gets it right, and where we get it wrong is when we fake it. When active listening tells us to you know, paraphrase back to the other person what we heard, it's supposed to be because we really heard it, and we're trying to acknowledge to them that we did. If all we're listening for is to say, so John, I heard you say this, and the other thing, but it didn't really come through here. We didn't really hear it.
Well, it's a real art, right? Conversation is an art. And I think, you know, many of us are trying to communicate important stuff through text messages today. And we often find that text message is not a conversation. It may be an exchange of things going back and forth. And I think that most of what we're talking about needs to happen in person.
Yeah.
We need to be together. We need to see body movements. We need to see facial expressions. We need to see all of that. And there's no substitute for this real dynamic skill of communicating with people in real conversations.
Yeah. So, John, there was a question that came in from one of our participants, and the person was asking, so what do you do? So what if you do the work and have the conversations and the dynamic remains poor? The goal being connecting leadership. Is there a point you become transparent about the failure and stop pursuing the connecting conversation?
Wow, what a wonderful question, and gets to the real issue about dealing with difficult relationships and difficult employees. And remember, the second conversation that we think is the most important, the one you should have the most commonly, is the connecting conversation. But the second most important conversation that you should have is an expectation conversation. So what we're teaching and talking about, and we're really trying to help leadership teams and organizations get really clear about what their cultural expectations are. How do we treat each other in this organization? How do we actually talk to each other? How do we connect with one another? And one of the things that I would encourage you to get clear about is the expectation that we treat each other civilly, that we actually do engage with each other, and that is actually part of our culture. And if we're clear about that, then we can begin to stop trying to connect for somebody who doesn't want to connect with us and talk about expectations. But here's the interesting thing. Expectation conversations are often seen negatively. And people go like, wow, that's the second most important conversation you're going to have. And we say, no, if expectations are normalized, and the conversation of expectations is something that happens all of the time, it won't be difficult to do that. And we like to talk about it this way. What can you expect from me? And here's what I'll expect from you. Because you're in an organization providing a service, doing work together. And part of that expectation has to do with how you are together, that culture.
The other thing the question makes me think of is a concept we talk a lot about, which is deal breakers. So let me talk about it in two contexts. One is, as you mentioned, the conversation with a colleague, with an employee, and it continues to be poor and things don't change. To me, it's kind of a deal breaker in the sense of, I'm not sure that their employment should continue. And so if indeed we can't have a conversation with an employee that can't have components of positivity in it and openness to hear something new or different, then I'm not sure that part of the employment should last. So this is why we highly emphasize that job descriptions that are only written about clinical or technical expertise, being the dispatcher, the mechanic, the paramedic, the EMT, the biller, the whatever, and doesn't include pieces about culture and doesn't include pieces about non-technical behavior, are job descriptions that need updating. So I think that's a deal breaker with that employee and their employment, or at least beginning a different conveying of information through a disciplinary or coaching process. So if it's with a leader, it's my boss, other bosses, I still think it's a deal breaker. If you're practicing good conversations and your desire is to provide information about how the culture could be better, how leadership could be better, and you are open to hearing something new or different as well, and you're not getting that same thing back, then I would think that's a deal breaker for the person. If you're in a culture that continues, I don't think there's any positive outcome of you being transparent and saying, if John's my boss, John, I've tried on numerous occasions to have conversations with you about your style of leadership and the culture that it's creating in this organization. And I notice you don't listen. And you're not open to what I'm trying to share. You're not in this conversation to hear something new or different. And I have to tell you that that's what I see and that's what others see.
Boy,
you can do that.
Yes.
I don't think that's a positive for anyone's career. I'm going to over exaggerate, and I'm going to call that the martyr that goes in to do that. And I think the better tact is to say, do you want to be part of an organization that's led by someone or someones that act and behave in that way? And I hope the answer is no. And then it's time to leave. It's time to clean up the resume, start connecting with others. Don't have to leave on the spot. We talk about, there's no snap decisions, but that's a deal breaker, likely a deal breaker.
Yeah. When you get serious about conversations, it's really revealing, right? About the true nature of the relationship. And what I want to encourage people in closing is make conversations a conversation topic, and just really get curious about this topic, and ask yourself, in our team meetings, are we having good conversations? Are we listening to each other? Is there a good exchange of ideas? Is there a willingness to genuinely consider the other person's point of view? All of these things are what we consider to be fundamental to creating an organization where there's a culture that people really want to belong to, and there's really high employee engagement, meaning that's where you have employees who have a warm and positive relationship with the organization.
And my wrap up is to just share some humbling, but really incredible feedback that I got here recently. With COVID, I haven't traveled as much as I usually do. So for the last 2 years or so, I've been around every single day and when I have that other hat on. And recently, one of the soups came to me and said, "Hey, got some interesting feedback." I said, "Great, what did you hear?" And they said, lots of folks are talking about a big change in you. I said, "Really? What's different? I mean, my hair is still the same, glasses. What's different?" And they said, "Folks feel you're way more approachable than you used to be."
Mm.
And I spent some time really thinking about that. And what it came back to was, because I was around more and had more free time, quote unquote, the few times I was there, I didn't have to pack in meetings and phone calls and all of those things. I had more unproductive time, as you know, we talk about, to just, when I saw a crew, go hang out and hear somebody talk about the new engagement or the puppy they just got, or, whatever it happened to be. And it was really humbling to hear that something so small as to go have one of those first conversations, the connecting conversation, had such a huge impact. Or said differently, not having it created a much different narrative about myself and my leadership.
And likely you would have said, "I've always been approachable," but now seeing this, yeah.
That's where I wanted to go to. I wanted to say, I want the analytical brain to kick in. Well, nothing's different. I haven't changed anything. But instead, I practiced the John and I went, let me think about that. So what we wanted to do today, folks, just to wrap up, is to really talk about how to have a conversation. Some of the reasons why we might not, some of the ways we might lead a conversation. And lastly, what we were trying to emphasize is the real power that comes from conversation and how it can be a game changer in your culture and can be a game changer in employee engagement.
Thank you all. Appreciate you hanging out with us.
Thanks. Be well. Stay safe.